Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez had survived 2 combat deployments, earned 3 commendations for valor, and trained countless soldiers in advanced tactical operations. But nothing had prepared her for the moment when Colonel Marcus Reeves cornered her in the supply depot at 2100 hours on a Tuesday night at Fort Meridian. "You've been avoiding my invitations, Sergeant," he said, his voice carrying the entitled confidence of a man who had never been told no. What happened next would shatter the silence that had protected predators in uniform for decades, as Elena's refusal to be another victim triggered a confrontation that would expose corruption, end careers, and prove that some lines should never be crossed, regardless of rank or consequences. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The events leading to that confrontation had been building for months, though Elena hadn't initially recognized the pattern for what it was. Colonel Reeves had taken command of the 3rd Infantry Training Battalion 6 months earlier, arriving with an impressive service record and recommendations from his previous assignments. His reputation as a demanding but fair leader had preceded him, and Elena had initially been optimistic about serving under someone with his credentials and experience. The first signs of trouble had been subtle enough to dismiss as coincidence or misinterpretation. Colonel Reeves began finding reasons to call Elena into his office for meetings that seemed unnecessarily long and strangely personal. He would ask about her personal life, her relationships, and her plans after the military in ways that felt more intrusive than professionally appropriate. When she mentioned having a boyfriend stationed overseas, she noticed disappointment flash across his face before he quickly returned to professional topics. Elena had been in the military long enough to understand the complex dynamics of authority and respect that governed military life. She knew that questioning a superior officer's motives was dangerous territory, especially for someone who had worked hard to build a reputation as a reliable and professional soldier. She convinced herself that she was being overly sensitive, that Colonel Reeves was simply trying to get to know his personnel better as an effective leader should. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The inappropriate comments began during the 3rd month of his command. Nothing explicitly sexual at first, just observations about her appearance that made her uncomfortable and praise for her physical fitness that lingered longer than necessary on certain aspects of her training regimen. When she wore her dress uniform for a ceremony, he made a point of telling her how stunning she looked, a comment that felt different from the professional acknowledgement she was accustomed to receiving from other officers. Elena confided in her closest friend on base, Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez, who had been her battle buddy since their first deployment together. Maria confirmed Elena's suspicions that Colonel Reeves's behavior was inappropriate and potentially dangerous. "Elena, you're not imagining this," Maria said during one of their conversations in the barracks. "I've heard similar stories from other women on base, but nobody wants to be the one to speak up against a colonel. The career consequences could be devastating." The escalation was gradual but unmistakable. Colonel Reeves began finding excuses to assign Elena to duties that would put her alone with him or in isolated areas of the base. He started showing up at the fitness center when she was working out, making comments about her training routine that felt more like personal interest than professional observation. Most disturbingly, he began making veiled references to career advancement opportunities that could be available to soldiers who demonstrated personal loyalty beyond their official duties. Elena's attempts to maintain professional distance only seemed to encourage Colonel Reeves's inappropriate behavior. When she requested transfers to other units or assignments that would reduce her contact with him, he denied them with explanations that sounded reasonable on paper but felt retaliatory in practice. He began scheduling mandatory one-on-one meetings in his office during evening hours when fewer people were around, creating situations that made Elena increasingly uncomfortable and concerned for her safety. The breaking point came when Colonel Reeves called Elena to the supply depot at 2100 hours, claiming there was an urgent inventory discrepancy that required her immediate attention. Elena knew this was likely a pretext, but refusing a direct order from a superior officer could result in disciplinary action that would destroy her military career. She decided to go but took precautions, informing Maria of her location and asking her to check on her if she didn't return within a reasonable time. The supply depot was located in a remote section of the base, away from the main barracks and administrative buildings. As Elena walked across the darkened compound toward the meeting location, she felt a growing sense of unease but forced herself to maintain the professional composure that had served her throughout her military career. She was a trained soldier, she reminded herself. She could handle whatever Colonel Reeves had planned. When she arrived at the supply depot, Colonel Reeves was waiting alone in the main storage area, the overhead lights creating harsh shadows that made the space feel more threatening than usual. "Sergeant Vasquez, thank you for coming so promptly," he said, but his tone was different from their previous encounters. Gone was any pretense of professional necessity. This was personal, and they both knew it. "Sir, you mentioned an inventory discrepancy that required immediate attention," Elena replied, maintaining military protocol while positioning herself near the exit. Her training had taught her to always be aware of escape routes and potential threats, skills that had kept her alive in combat zones and were now proving relevant in a situation she had never expected to face on her own base. Colonel Reeves stepped closer, and Elena could smell alcohol on his breath. "The only discrepancy I'm concerned about, Sergeant, is the distance you've been keeping from opportunities that could benefit your career significantly. I think it's time we had a more personal conversation about your future in my command." Elena's military training kicked in as Colonel Reeves moved closer, his intentions becoming unmistakably clear in the isolated confines of the supply depot. Every instinct honed through years of combat experience told her that this situation was about to escalate beyond inappropriate comments and unwanted attention. She had faced enemy combatants in hostile territory, but this felt different and more personal because it was happening within the very institution she had sworn to serve and protect. "Sir, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Elena said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "If there's no actual inventory issue, I should return to my quarters. We can discuss any career matters during regular office hours through proper channels." She took a step toward the exit, but Colonel Reeves moved to block her path, his smile transforming into something that sent chills down her spine. "Sergeant, you're being unnecessarily formal," Colonel Reeves said, his voice taking on a tone that Elena had never heard him use before. "We're both adults here, and I think we both understand what this is really about. You're an attractive woman in a position where I could be very helpful to your advancement. All I'm asking for is a little appreciation for the opportunities I could provide." Elena felt her training and instincts converging as she assessed the tactical situation. The supply depot had multiple exit points, but Colonel Reeves was positioned between her and the main entrance. Emergency lighting provided minimal visibility, and the nearest occupied buildings were far enough away that calling for help might not be immediately effective. She was wearing her standard duty uniform, which gave her mobility but limited defensive options beyond her own physical capabilities. "Colonel Reeves, what you're suggesting is inappropriate and against military regulations," Elena replied, her voice carrying the authority she had developed through years of leadership experience. "I'm going to leave now, and I suggest we both forget this conversation ever happened." She moved toward an alternate exit, but Colonel Reeves grabbed her arm with a grip that was intended to demonstrate his physical advantage and his belief that his rank gave him the right to do whatever he wanted. The physical contact crossed a line that Elena had been dreading since the inappropriate behavior began months earlier. Her combat training had taught her that once an aggressor made physical contact, the situation had moved beyond negotiation or de-escalation. She had milliseconds to decide how to respond, knowing that her next actions would determine not only her immediate safety but potentially the trajectory of her entire military career. "Let go of my arm immediately, sir," Elena said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of command that she used with subordinates who were about to make serious mistakes. But Colonel Reeves either didn't recognize the warning signs or didn't care about them. His grip tightened and he pulled her closer while reaching toward her with his other hand. "Come on, Elena, stop fighting this. You know you want the advancement opportunities I can provide. All you have to do is show a little gratitude, and your career could take off in ways you never imagined. Nobody has to know about our arrangement, and everyone benefits." His words revealed not only his intentions but his assumption that Elena would eventually submit to his demands rather than face the potential consequences of resistance. Elena's response was immediate and decisive. Years of hand-to-hand combat training, defensive tactics instruction, and real-world combat experience culminated in a series of movements that Colonel Reeves never saw coming. She pivoted to break his grip on her arm, simultaneously creating distance and positioning herself for maximum tactical advantage. When he lunged forward to regain control of the situation, she was ready with defensive measures that had been drilled into her through countless hours of military training. The confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds, but those moments changed everything for both of them. Colonel Reeves found himself on the ground, his nose clearly broken and bleeding profusely, while Elena stood over him in a defensive stance that made it clear she was prepared for whatever came next. The shock in his eyes revealed that he had never considered the possibility that his victim might fight back effectively. "You broke my nose," Colonel Reeves gasped, his voice distorted by pain and the blood flowing from his injury. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? I'm a colonel in the United States Army. You just assaulted a superior officer." Elena looked down at him with a mixture of disgust and satisfaction that surprised her with its intensity. "No, sir. I just defended myself against sexual assault by a superior officer who abused his position and authority. And unlike you, I understand exactly what I've done and why it was necessary." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the supply depot as Maria Rodriguez arrived with Master Sergeant James Thompson, drawn by the commotion and their concerns about Elena's safety. What they found was Colonel Reeves on the ground with obvious injuries, and Elena standing in a defensive position that told the entire story without words being necessary. "Sergeant Vasquez, are you injured?" Master Sergeant Thompson asked, his experience allowing him to quickly assess the situation and understand its implications. "Do you need medical attention or immediate assistance?" Elena shook her head, her composure returning as she realized that witnesses had arrived and her version of events would be heard and documented. "I'm uninjured, Master Sergeant. Colonel Reeves attempted to sexually assault me, and I defended myself using appropriate force. I recommend calling the military police and medical personnel immediately." The next few minutes unfolded with the efficiency and protocol that governed military responses to serious incidents. Military police arrived and began securing the scene while medics attended to Colonel Reeves's injuries. Elena provided her initial statement with the precision and attention to detail that characterized all of her professional activities, knowing that every word would be scrutinized and analyzed by investigators and military attorneys. As Colonel Reeves was loaded onto a stretcher for transport to the base medical facility, he made one final attempt to control the narrative. "This is all a misunderstanding that got out of hand," he called out to anyone within hearing distance. Sergeant Vasquez misinterpreted a conversation about her career development and overreacted with unnecessary violence. Elena felt a cold fury building as she realized that even with a broken nose and witnesses to his condition, Colonel Reeves was already attempting to manipulate the story and avoid responsibility for his actions. But she also felt something else: determination to ensure that his version of events would not prevail and that other women would not become his victims. The military police investigation that followed the confrontation in the supply depot moved with the systematic thoroughness that Major Lisa Park had perfected during 15 years of handling sensitive cases within the military justice system. As the lead investigator assigned to what was already being classified as a potential sexual assault case involving a senior officer, Major Park understood that every aspect of her investigation would be scrutinized by multiple levels of command, military attorneys, and potentially civilian oversight agencies. Elena found herself at the center of a process that felt almost as intimidating as the original assault attempt. Within hours of the incident, she was interviewed by military police, questioned by investigators, examined by medical personnel, and debriefed by victims. Each interaction required her to recount the events in detail, maintaining consistency while dealing with the emotional aftermath of defending herself against a superior officer who had abused his position and authority. The initial interviews revealed the complexity of investigating sexual assault allegations within the military hierarchy. Colonel Reeves had been treated for a broken nose, facial contusions, and what medical personnel classified as defensive injuries consistent with Elena's account of the confrontation. However, his attorney immediately began constructing a narrative that portrayed Elena as an unstable soldier who had violently overreacted to what he claimed was a misunderstood conversation about career development. Major Park's investigation quickly expanded beyond the specific incident in the supply depot as other women on the base came forward with their own stories about Colonel Reeves's inappropriate behavior. Sergeant Jennifer Walsh reported receiving unwanted text messages from the colonel that had nothing to do with military duties. Lieutenant Amanda Chen described being called into his office for meetings that felt more like personal interrogations than professional consultations. Corporal Sarah Martinez revealed that she had requested a transfer to another unit specifically to avoid continued contact with Colonel Reeves. The pattern that emerged painted a picture of systematic predatory behavior that had been escalating over the months since Colonel Reeves assumed command of the battalion. Each woman interviewed described similar tactics: inappropriate personal questions, comments about physical appearance, assignments designed to create isolated contact, and implications that career advancement was linked to personal compliance with his desires. Elena's friend Maria Rodriguez became a crucial witness, whose testimony corroborated not only the specific events of that night, but also the months of escalating inappropriate behavior that had preceded the assault attempt. Maria's detailed accounts of her conversations with Elena provided investigators with contemporaneous evidence that supported Elena's version of events and demonstrated a pattern of predatory behavior rather than an isolated misunderstanding. The investigation also revealed the sophisticated methods Colonel Reeves had used to avoid official accountability for his actions. He had been careful to avoid putting inappropriate comments in writing, conducted most of his inappropriate interactions in settings where there were no witnesses, and used his authority to prevent potential victims from seeking transfers or assignments that would remove them from his sphere of influence. Master Sergeant Thompson's witness testimony proved particularly damaging to Colonel Reeves's attempts to frame the incident as a misunderstanding. As a senior non-commissioned officer with 22 years of military experience, his observations carried significant weight with investigators. He testified that Elena's defensive posture and Colonel Reeves's condition were consistent with someone who had been defending herself against an aggressor, not someone who had initiated violence without provocation. The military's victim advocacy program assigned Elena a dedicated counselor, Captain Rebecca Foster, who helped her navigate the complex legal and administrative processes that followed her decision to defend herself and report the assault attempt. Captain Foster had extensive experience supporting military sexual assault survivors and understood both the challenges Elena faced and the importance of ensuring that her rights were protected throughout the investigation. "Elena, I want you to understand that what you did took incredible courage," Captain Foster explained during one of their early meetings. "Not just defending yourself physically, but choosing to report what happened and trust the system to handle it appropriately. Unfortunately, I also need to prepare you for the fact that this process will be difficult, and that there will be people who try to discredit your account or minimize what Colonel Reeves did." The administrative aspects of the investigation created additional stress for Elena as she found herself removed from her normal duties pending the completion of the inquiry. While this was standard protocol designed to protect both the accuser and the accused, it meant that Elena's daily routine was disrupted, and she had more time to dwell on the incident and its potential consequences for her military career. Colonel Reeves was also removed from command pending the investigation, but his temporary replacement, Lieutenant Colonel David Patterson, made it clear that he supported Elena's actions and was committed to ensuring that the investigation proceeded without interference or intimidation. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson had worked with Elena on previous assignments and understood her character and professionalism well enough to know that she would never fabricate such serious allegations. The investigation expanded to include a review of Colonel Reeves's personnel files, communications, and previous assignments to determine whether similar incidents had occurred earlier in his career.
What investigators discovered was a pattern of complaints and transfers that had been explained away as personality conflicts or misunderstandings, but which now appeared to represent a history of inappropriate behavior that had been systematically covered up or Elena's military records were also thoroughly reviewed, and what investigators found was exemplary service history that included commendations for integrity, leadership, and courage. Her psychological evaluations, performance reviews, and peer assessments all painted a picture of a stable professional soldier who had never shown any tendency toward violence or false accusations. As the investigation progressed, Elena began to understand that her decision to fight back had exposed not just Colonel Reeves's predatory behavior but systemic problems within the military's handling of sexual assault cases. The fact that multiple women had experienced similar inappropriate behavior without feeling safe enough to report it highlighted the need for significant changes in how the military protected service members from abuse by their superiors. The preliminary findings of Major Park's investigation were clear. Colonel Reeves had attempted to sexually assault Sergeant Vasquez, and her defensive actions were justified and appropriate given the circumstances. However, Elena knew that the formal legal proceedings would be even more challenging than the investigation, and that Colonel Reeves's military attorney would use every possible strategy to avoid accountability for his.
The convening of a formal Article 32 hearing to determine whether Colonel Reeves would face court-martial proceedings marked a turning point in Elena's fight for justice within the military system. Captain Amanda Sterling, the investigating officer appointed to conduct the hearing, had built her reputation on thorough, impartial examinations of complex cases involving senior officers. Her presence signaled that the military was taking Elena's allegations seriously, despite the potential embarrassment and controversy that would result from prosecuting a colonel for sexual assault. Elena's military attorney, Major Robert Chen, had extensive experience defending service members' rights in high-profile cases and understood the unique challenges presented by sexual assault allegations within the military hierarchy. During their preparation sessions, he helped Elena understand that the Article 32 hearing was not a trial but rather a process to determine whether sufficient evidence existed to justify formal court-martial proceedings against Colonel Reeves. "Elena, I want you to understand that this hearing is going to be intense," Major Chen explained during one of their preparation meetings. "Colonel Reeves's defense team will try to discredit your testimony, question your motives, and suggest alternative explanations for what happened in that supply depot. But we have strong evidence, credible witnesses, and most importantly, we have the truth on our side." The hearing was conducted in the base's legal offices, a formal setting that emphasized the gravity of the proceedings and the potential consequences for all parties involved. Elena testified for over 3 hours, providing detailed accounts of the months of inappropriate behavior that had preceded the assault attempt, the specific events in the supply depot, and her decision to defend herself when Colonel Reeves became physically aggressive. Colonel Reeves's defense attorney, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Morrison, employed the aggressive tactics that Elena had been warned to expect. She questioned Elena's memory of events, suggested that her interpretation of Colonel Reeves's behavior had been influenced by personal bias, and implied that the physical confrontation had been unnecessary and excessive. However, Elena's military training and natural composure served her well during the cross-examination, and her responses were consistent, detailed, and credible. The testimony of other women who had experienced similar inappropriate behavior from Colonel Reeves proved crucial in establishing a pattern of predatory conduct that supported Elena's allegations. Sergeant Jennifer Walsh's testimony about unwanted text messages provided documented evidence of inappropriate communication. Lieutenant Amanda Chen's accounts of uncomfortable meetings corroborated Elena's descriptions of Colonel Reeves's methods and tactics. Each witness added another layer of credibility to Elena's version of events. Master Sergeant Thompson's testimony was particularly compelling because of his status as a senior non-commissioned officer with no personal stake in the outcome of the proceedings. His description of the scene he encountered in the supply depot, Elena's defensive posture, and Colonel Reeves's obvious injuries supported the conclusion that Elena had been defending herself rather than initiating an unprovoked attack. The medical evidence presented during the hearing provided objective support for Elena's account of the confrontation. Colonel Reeves's injuries were consistent with defensive tactics taught in military hand-to-hand combat training, and the absence of any injuries to Elena supported her claim that she had been defending herself against an aggressor rather than engaging in mutual combat. Maria Rodriguez's testimony about her conversations with Elena before and after the incident demonstrated that Elena's allegations were consistent and had been reported to others contemporaneously rather than fabricated after the fact. Her account of Elena's increasing discomfort with Colonel Reeves's behavior over several months helped establish the context that led to the confrontation in the supply depot. The psychological evaluation of Elena conducted by military mental health professionals found no evidence of deception, fabrication, or mental instability that would call her testimony into question. The evaluation noted that Elena displayed symptoms consistent with someone who had experienced a traumatic assault attempt, but also found that she was mentally competent and reliable as a witness. Colonel Reeves testified on his own behalf, maintaining his claim that the entire incident had been a misunderstanding that escalated unnecessarily due to Elena's overreaction to what he characterized as a professional conversation about career development. However, his testimony was undermined by the documented pattern of inappropriate behavior with multiple women and his inability to provide credible explanations for the specific circumstances that led to the confrontation. The defense's attempts to portray Elena as unstable or vindictive fell apart under scrutiny of her exemplary service record and the testimony of her supervisors and peers. Her reputation for integrity, professionalism, and courage under fire made it difficult for the defense to suggest that she would fabricate such serious allegations for personal gain or revenge. Captain Sterling's preliminary recommendation following the Article 32 hearing was that sufficient evidence existed to proceed with court-martial proceedings against Colonel Reeves on charges of attempted sexual assault, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Her report noted that Elena's testimony was credible, consistent, and supported by both witness testimony and physical evidence. The convening authority, Brigadier General Patricia Davis, reviewed the hearing transcript and evidence before making the final decision about whether to proceed with court-martial proceedings. As a senior female officer who had fought her own battles against discrimination and inappropriate behavior during her career, General Davis understood the importance of sending a clear message that sexual assault would not be tolerated, regardless of the perpetrator's rank or position. Elena felt a mixture of relief and apprehension when she learned that General Davis had decided to proceed with a general court-martial, the most serious level of military justice proceedings. The decision meant that her allegations had been validated by the military justice system, but it also meant that she would face additional months of legal proceedings and public scrutiny as the case moved forward. The announcement of the court-martial proceedings sent shockwaves through the base and the broader military community. It was rare for a colonel to face such serious charges, and Elena knew that the outcome of the case would be closely watched by service members, military leaders, and civilians interested in how the military handled sexual assault allegations against senior officers. As Elena prepared for the court-martial proceedings, she understood that her decision to fight back in that supply depot had evolved into something much larger than personal self-defense. She was now at the center of a case that could influence how the military handled sexual assault allegations and whether service members would feel safe reporting inappropriate behavior by their superiors. The weeks leading up to Colonel Reeves's court-martial transformed Elena from a defendant in a military investigation into the central figure in a case that was attracting national attention to military sexual assault policies. Major Chen's legal team expanded to include specialists in military sexual assault prosecution, media relations experts, and victim advocacy professionals who understood the unique pressures Elena would face as her case became a symbol of broader issues within the military justice system. Elena's preparation for the court-martial was intensive and emotionally draining, requiring her to relive the assault attempt repeatedly while attorneys helped her anticipate the aggressive defense strategies that Colonel Reeves's legal team would employ. Mock cross-examinations prepared her for questions designed to discredit her character, challenge her memory, and suggest alternative explanations for the events in the supply depot that night. The support Elena received from unexpected sources became one of the most encouraging aspects of her experience with the military justice system. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson, who had assumed temporary command of the battalion, made it clear that he fully supported Elena's decision to report the assault attempt and defend herself against Colonel Reeves's predatory behavior. His backing carried significant weight within the command structure and helped counter suggestions that Elena was a disgruntled soldier seeking revenge against a superior officer. Brigadier General Davis took the unusual step of personally meeting with Elena to discuss the broader implications of her case for military sexual assault policies and prevention programs. During their conversation, General Davis revealed that she had faced similar challenges earlier in her career but had not felt safe enough to report inappropriate behavior by superior officers due to the potential career consequences. "Sergeant Vasquez, what you did took courage that I didn't have when I was your age and rank," General Davis said during their meeting. "Your willingness to fight back and then trust the system to handle your case appropriately is creating opportunities for changes that could protect countless other service members in the future. I want you to know that you have my complete support and that this command will ensure you receive fair treatment throughout these proceedings." The media attention surrounding the case brought both positive and negative consequences for Elena. Supportive coverage in military publications and civilian newspapers highlighted her exemplary service record and the importance of holding senior officers accountable for sexual assault. However, she also faced criticism from some quarters that suggested she should have handled the situation through unofficial channels rather than formal military justice proceedings. Elena's family became an unexpected source of strength during the challenging period leading up to the court-martial. Her parents, both military veterans themselves, understood the complexity of military culture and the courage required to report inappropriate behavior by a superior officer. Her father, a retired master sergeant, told her that he was proud of her for standing up to abuse of authority and setting an example for other service members. The support group that formed around Elena included other women who had experienced sexual harassment or assault within the military but had not felt safe enough to report their experiences. Their willingness to share their stories with Elena and her legal team provided additional context for understanding Colonel Reeves's behavior and the systemic problems that had allowed it to continue unchecked. Maria Rodriguez's loyalty and friendship proved crucial during the most difficult aspects of Elena's preparation for the court-martial. As Elena's battle buddy and closest confidant, Maria understood better than anyone the emotional toll that the legal proceedings were taking on Elena's mental health and military career. She made herself available for support at any hour and helped Elena maintain perspective when the stress became overwhelming. The investigation had revealed that Colonel Reeves's inappropriate behavior extended beyond his current assignment, with evidence suggesting similar patterns at his previous duty stations. Military attorneys working on Elena's case had identified other women who had requested transfers or early discharges to escape his predatory behavior, providing additional evidence of systemic misconduct that had been ignored or covered up by previous commanders. Elena's preparation included extensive work with victim advocacy specialists who helped her understand her rights throughout the court-martial process and prepare for the emotional challenges of testifying about traumatic experiences in front of military officers who would determine Colonel Reeves's fate. These sessions also addressed the potential long-term consequences of her decision to pursue formal charges rather than seeking an informal resolution. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court found Elena to be mentally stable, credible, and suffering from symptoms consistent with someone who had experienced a traumatic assault attempt. The evaluation noted that her decision to defend herself physically was consistent with her military training and the immediate threat she faced, and that her subsequent decision to report the incident demonstrated courage and commitment to military values. Major Chen's legal strategy focused on presenting Elena as a professional soldier who had exhausted informal options for addressing Colonel Reeves's inappropriate behavior before being forced to defend herself against a physical assault attempt. The strategy emphasized Elena's exemplary service record, her attempts to maintain professional distance from Colonel Reeves, and the pattern of predatory behavior that had escalated to the point where physical assault became inevitable. The defense team's strategy, as revealed through pre-trial motions and discovery requests, appeared to focus on portraying the incident as a misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion by an oversensitive soldier seeking attention or career advancement.
However, the abundance of evidence supporting Elena's account and the testimony of multiple witnesses made this defense strategy increasingly difficult to sustain. Elena's commanding officers from her previous assignments provided character testimony that reinforced her reputation for integrity, professionalism, and leadership. Their statements described Elena as someone who had never shown any tendency toward false accusations, unnecessary violence, or inappropriate behavior with superior officers. As the court-martial date approached, Elena reflected on how her decision to defend herself in that supply depot had evolved into a test case for military sexual assault policies and accountability measures. She understood that the outcome would influence how future cases were handled and whether other service members would feel safe reporting inappropriate behavior by their superiors. The weight of representing broader issues beyond her personal experience, sometimes overwhelming, but Elena found strength in knowing that her courage might prevent other women from experiencing the predatory behavior that she had endured. Her case had become about more than personal justice. It was about changing a military culture that too often protected perpetrators and silenced victims. The General Court-Martial of Colonel Marcus Reeves convened in the main courtroom of Fort Meridian's legal complex, a formal military tribunal that would determine whether Elena's allegations could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The proceeding was presided over by Colonel Patricia Williams, a military judge with extensive experience in sexual assault cases, and included a panel of senior officers who would serve as both judge and jury in determining Colonel Reeves's guilt or Elena's testimony as the primary witness stretched across 2 full days of direct examination and cross-examination that tested every aspect of her quote of the events leading up to and including the assault attempt in the supply depot. Major Chen guided her through a chronological presentation of Colonel Reeves's escalating inappropriate behavior, the specific circumstances of the confrontation, and her decision to defend herself when he became physically aggressive. The direct examination allowed Elena to present her story in her words, describing the months of uncomfortable meetings, inappropriate comments, and implied threats to her career advancement that had preceded the assault attempt. Her testimony was detailed, consistent, and delivered with the professional composure that had characterized her entire military career, making a strong impression on the court-martial panel. Colonel Reeves made it clear that my career advancement was dependent on my to provide personal favors that had nothing to do with military duties. Elena testified. When I continued to maintain professional boundaries, he escalated his behavior to the point where he cornered me in an isolated location and attempted to physically force compliance with his demands. I defended myself using the minimum force necessary to stop the assault and escape the situation. The cross-examination by Lieutenant Colonel Morrison was aggressive and personal, employing tactics designed to discredit Elena's character, question her motives, and suggest that her interpretation of Colonel Reeves's behavior had been influenced by personal bias or mental instability. However, Elena's preparation with Major Chen's legal team had anticipated these strategies, and her responses remained consistent and credible under pressure. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's attempts to portray Elena as an unstable soldier seeking revenge against a superior officer fell apart when confronted with Elena's exemplary service record, psychological evaluations, and the testimony of numerous character witnesses. Her questions about Elena's decision to defend herself physically rather than attempting to de-escalate the situation were effectively countered by expert testimony about appropriate responses to sexual assault attempts. The testimony of other women who had experienced similar inappropriate behavior from Colonel Reeves provided crucial corroboration for Elena's allegations and established a pattern of predatory conduct that supported her version of events. Each witness described similar tactics, escalating behavior, and threats to career advancement that painted a picture of systematic abuse of authority rather than isolated misunderstandings. Sergeant Jennifer Walsh's testimony about unwanted text messages from Colonel Reeves was particularly damaging because it provided documented evidence of inappropriate communication that contradicted his claims of professional behavior. The messages, which had been preserved on her phone and analyzed by military investigators, contained personal comments and requests for private meetings that had nothing to do with military duties. Lieutenant Amanda Chen's testimony about uncomfortable meetings and inappropriate questions provided additional evidence of Colonel Reeves's pattern of boundary violations with female subordinates. Her account of requesting a transfer to avoid continued contact with him supported Elena's claim that multiple women had been affected by his predatory behavior. Master Sergeant Thompson's testimony as a witness to the aftermath of the confrontation in the supply depot provided objective, professional observations about Elena's defensive posture and Colonel Reeves's obvious injuries. As a senior non-commissioned officer with no personal stake in the outcome, his testimony carried significant weight with the court-martial panel. The medical testimony regarding Colonel Reeves's injuries provided scientific support for Elena's account of the confrontation. The attending physician who treated his broken nose and facial contusions testified that the injuries were consistent with defensive tactics taught in military hand-to-hand combat training, and that Elena's account of the confrontation was medically plausible. Expert testimony about military sexual assault dynamics helped the court-martial panel understand the context within which the assault attempt had occurred, and the appropriateness of Elena's response. Dr. Rachel Martinez, a clinical psychologist specializing in military sexual trauma, explained how predators within military hierarchies use authority and career consequences to silence victims and prevent reporting of inappropriate behavior. Colonel Reeves's testimony on his own behalf was carefully prepared by his defense team, but struggled to overcome the weight of evidence supporting Elena's allegations. His claim that the entire incident had been a misunderstanding was undermined by the documented pattern of inappropriate behavior with multiple women and his inability to provide credible explanations for the specific circumstances that led to the confrontation. The defense's character witnesses, including former subordinates and colleagues from Colonel Reeves's previous assignments, provided testimony about his professional competence and leadership abilities. However, their testimony was effectively countered by evidence that similar complaints had been made at previous duty stations but had been dismissed or covered up by commanders who prioritized unit cohesion over individual accountability. The prosecution's closing argument delivered by Major Chen emphasized Elena's credibility, the corroborating evidence provided by other witnesses, and the appropriateness of her response to Colonel Reeves's assault attempt. Major Chen argued that Elena had exhausted informal options for addressing the inappropriate behavior and had been forced to defend herself when Colonel Reeves escalated to physical assault. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's closing argument for the defense focused on reasonable doubt, suggesting that the evidence was insufficient to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Colonel Reeves had intended to commit sexual assault rather than having a conversation that was misinterpreted by Elena. However, this argument was weakened by the testimony of multiple witnesses and the documented pattern of predatory behavior. The court-martial panel deliberated for 6 hours before returning with their verdict. Elena sat in the courtroom with Major Chen and her support team, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not only whether justice would be served in her case, but whether the military justice system would send a clear message about accountability for sexual assault by senior officers. When Colonel Williams announced that the panel had found Colonel Reeves guilty on all charges, Elena felt a mixture of relief, vindication, and exhaustion. The months of investigation, preparation, and testimony had culminated in a verdict that validated her decision to defend herself and report the assault attempt through official channels.
The guilty verdict against Colonel Marcus Reeves sent shockwaves through Fort Meridian and rippled across the entire military justice system with implications that extended far beyond Elena's individual case. As the court-martial panel announced their findings on charges of attempted sexual assault, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming an officer, Elena felt a profound sense of vindication that was tempered by the knowledge that her fight for justice had come at significant personal and professional costs. The sentencing phase of the court-martial proceedings required Elena to testify about the impact that Colonel Reeves's assault attempt and the subsequent legal proceedings had on her military career, personal life, and mental health. Her victim impact statement was a powerful articulation of how sexual assault by a superior officer affects not just the immediate victim, but the broader military community's trust in leadership and command authority. The assault attempt itself was traumatic, but the months of investigation and legal proceedings have been almost equally challenging, Elena testified during the sentencing phase. I've been forced to defend my character, my professionalism, and my right to serve in a military that I love and have defended with my life. No service member should have to choose between their safety and their career, and no one should have to endure what I've experienced to achieve basic accountability for criminal behavior. The court-martial panel's sentence reflected the severity of Colonel Reeves's crimes and the military's recognition that sexual assault by senior officers represented a fundamental betrayal of military values and leadership responsibilities. Colonel Reeves was sentenced to dismissal from the Army, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and confinement for 18 months in a military correctional facility. The dismissal was equivalent to a dishonorable discharge and would result in the loss of all military benefits and retirement eligibility. The immediate aftermath of the verdict brought both celebration and controversy within the military community. Elena's supporters, including the women who had testified about their own experiences with Colonel Reeves's inappropriate behavior, saw the conviction as validation of their courage in coming forward and a sign that the military justice system could hold senior officers accountable for sexual assault. However, Elena also faced criticism from some quarters of the military community, including officers who suggested that she should have handled the situation through informal channels rather than formal legal proceedings that had damaged unit cohesion and military readiness. These critics argued that Colonel Reeves's career had been destroyed over what they characterized as a misunderstanding that could have been resolved through counseling or administrative action. Brigadier General Davis used the verdict as an opportunity to address broader issues of sexual assault prevention and response within the military. In a base-wide announcement, she emphasized that Elena's courage in reporting the assault attempt and trusting the military justice system had created opportunities for institutional changes that would protect other service members from similar experiences. Sergeant Vasquez's actions have demonstrated that the military justice system can and will hold perpetrators accountable regardless of their rank or position, General Davis announced. Her courage in defending herself and then trusting our legal processes to handle her case appropriately has helped us identify and address systemic problems that had allowed predatory behavior to continue unchecked. We are implementing changes to our reporting procedures, command training, and victim support services that will make our military communities safer for everyone. The media coverage of the verdict was extensive and generally supportive of Elena's actions and the military's handling of her case. National news outlets featured stories about her courage in defending herself and pursuing justice through official channels, while military publications highlighted the precedent that had been set for future sexual assault cases involving senior officers. Elena's family expressed pride in her courage and persistence throughout the legal proceedings, but also concern about the toll that the experience had taken on her mental health and military career. Her parents, both military veterans, understood the complexity of challenging a superior officer and the courage required to see the case through to completion despite significant personal and professional risks. The support Elena received from other military sexual assault survivors was overwhelming and emotionally sustaining during the difficult period following the verdict. Women from across the military branches reached out to share their own stories and express gratitude for Elena's willingness to fight for accountability that they had never been able to achieve in their own cases. Maria Rodriguez continued to be Elena's closest supporter and confidant, helping her process the complex emotions that followed the verdict and prepare for the transition back to normal military duties. Their friendship had been strengthened by the shared experience of fighting for justice within a system that had historically protected perpetrators and silenced victims. The conviction of Colonel Reeves also prompted a broader review of his previous assignments and the handling of earlier complaints about his behavior. Military investigators discovered evidence of similar inappropriate conduct at multiple duty stations, raising questions about how such behavior had been allowed to continue unchecked for so many years and what systemic changes were needed to prevent similar situations in the future. Elena's military career began to recover as she returned to normal duties with the strong support of Lieutenant Colonel Patterson and other commanders who recognized her professionalism and integrity. However, she also faced the challenge of rebuilding her reputation within a military community where some continued to view her as a troublemaker who had unnecessarily damaged unit cohesion and command authority. The conviction also prompted changes to military sexual assault prevention and response programs at Fort Meridian and other installations. New training programs focused on bystander intervention, reporting procedures, and command responsibility for maintaining appropriate professional relationships were implemented based on lessons learned from Elena's case. Elena's decision to remain in the military and continue her service despite the challenges she had faced sent a powerful message about resilience and commitment to military values. Her choice to stay demonstrated that sexual assault survivors could overcome traumatic experiences and continue to serve with distinction while also holding perpetrators accountable for their actions. The precedent set by Colonel Reeves's conviction had implications that extended beyond Fort Meridian to the broader military justice system. Legal experts noted that the case demonstrated the military's willingness to prosecute senior officers for sexual assault and could encourage other victims to report similar crimes rather than suffering in silence or seeking administrative rather than legal remedies. As Elena reflected on the months since that confrontation in the supply depot, she understood that her decision to defend herself had evolved into something much larger than personal protection. Her case had become a symbol of the military's commitment to justice and accountability, demonstrating that no one was above the law regardless of their rank or position within the command structure. The conviction of Colonel Marcus Reeves catalyzed a series of reforms and policy changes that extended far beyond Fort Meridian, as military leadership recognized that Elena's case had exposed systemic problems requiring comprehensive solutions. Secretary of Defense Patricia Reynolds ordered a department-wide review of sexual assault prevention and response programs using Elena's experience as a case study for identifying gaps in current policy and procedures that had allowed predatory behavior to continue unchecked. Elena found herself unexpectedly thrust into a role as a subject matter expert on military sexual assault issues, receiving invitations to speak at command conferences, participate in policy development committees, and provide input on training programs designed to prevent similar incidents. While she initially felt uncomfortable with the public attention, she gradually came to understand that her experience could help create changes that would protect other service members from predatory behavior. The Department of Defense comprehensive review revealed that Elena's experience was unfortunately not unique, with similar patterns of predatory behavior by senior officers documented at installations across all military branches. The review identified systemic problems including inadequate training for commanders on recognizing and responding to sexual harassment, insufficient protection for victims who reported inappropriate behavior, and command climates that prioritized unit cohesion over individual accountability. Elena's testimony before a congressional subcommittee on military personnel issues brought national attention to the need for legislative changes to strengthen military sexual assault prevention and response capabilities. Her appearance before Congress was broadcast on national television and became a defining moment in the broader conversation about military culture and the protection of service members from abuse by their superiors. Honorable members of Congress, my case demonstrates both the strengths and weaknesses of our current military justice system, Elena testified. The system ultimately held my attacker accountable, but only after I was forced to endure months of investigation, legal proceedings, and character assassination that could have been prevented with better policies and command oversight. We must do better to protect service members before assault occurs, not just respond after damage has been done. The military's response to Elena's case included the implementation of new command training requirements that specifically addressed sexual harassment recognition, appropriate response procedures, and the legal obligations of commanders to maintain professional command climates. These training programs used Elena's case as an example of how inappropriate behavior can escalate to criminal assault when not addressed promptly and appropriately. Elena's unit at Fort Meridian became a model for implementing reformed sexual assault prevention and response procedures, with Lieutenant Colonel Patterson working closely with Elena to develop training programs and command policies that prioritized victim protection and perpetrator accountability. Their collaborative approach demonstrated how survivors could contribute to prevention efforts while continuing their military service. The media attention surrounding Elena's case also brought scrutiny to the military's historical handling of sexual assault allegations against senior officers. Investigative journalists uncovered evidence of similar cases that had been resolved through administrative action rather than criminal prosecution, raising questions about whether Elena's case represented a turning point in military justice or an isolated example of accountability. Elena's relationship with other military sexual assault survivors evolved into an informal support network that provided assistance to service members facing similar challenges. Through social media groups and formal mentoring programs, Elena connected with women across the military branches who sought advice about reporting procedures, legal rights, and strategies for maintaining their military careers while pursuing justice. The precedent set by Colonel Reeves's conviction had immediate effects on pending sexual assault cases throughout the military justice system. Defense attorneys reported increased willingness by military prosecutors to pursue charges against senior officers, while victim advocates noted that more service members were choosing to report inappropriate behavior rather than seeking transfers or early discharge to escape predatory superiors. Elena's career trajectory following the conviction demonstrated that military sexual assault survivors could continue to advance professionally while also advocating for policy changes and supporting other victims. Her promotion to Sergeant First Class came with assignment to a military justice position where she could directly contribute to improving the system that had ultimately provided her with justice. The international attention that Elena's case received also prompted discussions about sexual assault in military organizations worldwide. NATO allies and other international partners sought briefings on the reforms implemented by the U.S. military following Elena's case, leading to collaborative efforts to improve sexual assault prevention and response across multiple military organizations. Elena's speaking engagements at military installations across the country became opportunities to share lessons learned from her experience and encourage other service members to report inappropriate behavior rather than suffering in silence. Her presentations focused on the importance of early intervention, the availability of support resources, and the military's commitment to holding perpetrators accountable regardless of their rank or position. The changes implemented at Fort Meridian following Elena's case resulted in measurable improvements in command climate assessments and increased reporting of sexual harassment incidents. While the increase in reports initially raised concerns about the scope of the problem, commanders and victim advocates recognized that improved reporting indicated increased trust in the system rather than increased incidents. Elena's collaboration with military researchers and policy analysts helped identify additional reforms needed to address the root causes of military sexual assault rather than just responding to incidents after they occurred. Her insights into the tactics used by predators within military hierarchies informed new training programs and policy guidelines designed to prevent inappropriate behavior before it escalated to criminal conduct. The transformation of Elena from sexual assault victim to policy advocate and military justice professional demonstrated the resilience and adaptability that characterized the best aspects of military service. Her ability to channel her traumatic experience into positive change for the broader military community exemplified the values of service, sacrifice, and commitment to something larger than individual. As Elena reflected on the year since that confrontation in the supply depot, she understood that her decision to defend herself had initiated changes that would protect countless other service members from experiencing the predatory behavior she had endured. Her case had become a catalyst for reforms that strengthened the military's commitment to justice, accountability, and the protection of all service members from abuse by their superiors. 2 years after Elena Vasquez broke Colonel Marcus Reeves's nose in the supply depot at Fort Meridian, the ripple effects of her courageous stand had transformed military sexual assault prevention and response programs across all branches of the armed forces. Elena, now promoted to Master Sergeant and serving as the military justice specialist at the Pentagon, found herself at the center of policy development efforts that were reshaping how the military protected service members from predatory behavior by their superiors. The comprehensive reforms implemented following Elena's case had produced measurable results in improving command climates and increasing accountability for inappropriate behavior.
Military-wide statistics showed significant increases in sexual harassment reporting, which commanders and policy analysts interpreted as evidence of improved trust in the system rather than increased incidents. More importantly, the data revealed substantial increases in successful prosecutions of sexual assault cases involving senior officers, demonstrating that Elena's precedent had indeed changed how the military justice system handled such cases. Elena's role at the Pentagon involved developing training curricula, reviewing policy recommendations, and serving as a subject matter expert for congressional briefings on military sexual assault issues. Her unique perspective as both a survivor and a military justice professional provided invaluable insights into the practical implementation of reforms and the identification of areas where additional changes were needed. The Elena Vasquez Military Justice Training Center, established at Fort Meridian as a specialized facility for training military police, investigators, and legal personnel in sexual assault case management, represented the institutional recognition of her contributions to military justice reform. The center's programs emphasized victim-centered approaches, thorough investigation techniques, and the importance of maintaining accountability regardless of perpetrator's rank or position within the command structure. Elena's testimony before international military justice conferences had sparked similar reforms in allied nations, with several NATO countries implementing modified versions of the policies developed following her case. Her presentation to the International Military Justice Council became a model for addressing sexual assault within military hierarchies and demonstrated the global significance of her courage in confronting predatory behavior. The support network that had formed around Elena during her legal battle had evolved into a formal organization called Military Survivors United, which provided resources, advocacy, and peer support for service members who had experienced sexual assault or harassment. Elena served on the organization's advisory board, helping to develop programs that address the unique challenges faced by military sexual assault survivors. Elena's personal relationships had also evolved in positive ways following her experience with the military justice system. Her friendship with Maria Rodriguez had deepened through their shared commitment to supporting other survivors and advocating for continued reforms. Maria, now a drill sergeant at a military training facility, incorporated lessons learned from Elena's case into her leadership training for new soldiers. The mentoring relationship that Elena had developed with Brigadier General Davis, now promoted to Major General, provided ongoing opportunities to influence military policy at the highest levels. General Davis frequently cited Elena's case as an example of how individual courage could catalyze institutional change, and encouraged other senior officers to create command climates that supported victims rather than protecting perpetrators. Elena's romantic relationship with Captain David Martinez, a military attorney she had met during a policy development conference, demonstrated that sexual assault survivors could build healthy, trusting relationships while continuing to advocate for justice and accountability. Their partnership, both personal and professional, had become a model for how military couples could support each other's careers while working toward shared goals of institutional improvement. The book that Elena co-authored with a military historian, titled Breaking the Silence: A Soldier's Fight for Justice, had become required reading at military academies and professional development courses. The book's detailed account of her experience with predatory behavior and the military justice system provided future officers with insights into the importance of maintaining professional command climates and responding appropriately to reports of inappropriate behavior. Elena's speaking engagements at civilian universities and professional conferences had expanded the conversation about military sexual assault beyond military audiences to include academic researchers, policy analysts, and corporate leaders interested in addressing workplace harassment and assault. Her presentations emphasized the transferable lessons from military justice reform for improving accountability and victim protection in civilian organizations. The research studies that used Elena's case as a foundation for understanding military sexual assault dynamics had contributed to the development of evidence-based prevention and response strategies. Academic researchers from multiple disciplines collaborated with military personnel to analyze the factors that had allowed Colonel Reeves's predatory behavior to continue unchecked and identify systemic changes needed to prevent similar situations. Elena continued military service despite the trauma she had experienced and the opportunities she could have pursued in civilian career, sent a powerful message about resilience, commitment, and the possibility of creating positive change from within military institutions. Her decision to remain in uniform and work for reform rather than leaving the military demonstrated that sexual assault survivors could overcome their experiences and contribute to preventing similar incidents. The annual recognition ceremony held at Fort Meridian to honor Elena's courage and the broader reforms that had resulted from her case became an opportunity to reinforce the military's commitment to justice and accountability. The ceremony featured presentations by other survivors who had found the courage to report inappropriate behavior, demonstrating the ongoing impact of Elena's precedent on military culture. Elena's influence on military justice policy extended to the development of new legal precedents that strengthened protections for service members who reported sexual assault by superior officers. Court decisions citing her case had established clear standards for investigating such allegations and holding perpetrators accountable, regardless of their rank or position within the command structure. The transformation of Fort Meridian from a base where predatory behavior had been tolerated to a model installation for sexual prevention demonstrated the possibility of creating lasting cultural change within military organizations. The command climate surveys and exit interviews consistently showed improvements in service member confidence in leadership and trust in the military justice system. As Elena prepared for her next assignment as the lead instructor at the Military Justice Training Center bearing her name, she reflected on how her split-second decision to defend herself in that supply depot had evolved into a career dedicated to protecting other service members from similar experiences. Her journey from victim to advocate to policy leader exemplified the military's capacity for positive change when individual courage was supported by institutional commitment to justice and accountability. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.